course, doesn't that bring it right into the building? It's going to happen, but what are you going to do? The dome at the top of the building in the Roaring '20s was the Stratosphere Lounge Speakeasy. Today, it's the presentation room of Helmut Jahn from Germany originally. And he has offices on a lower floor in the building. We'll see Helmut Jahn's designs later, much different from Frederick Dinkelberg's design that was inspired by an Italian monastery. He was working with Javert Thielbar Fugard. All you New Yorkers, Dinkelberg designed your famous Flatiron building in New York City, but probably about the same time too. Now, I mentioned that steel and glass style, dominant for 30 years, very plain, unornamented design style. And by the 1980s, I think there was a bit of a reaction to it. And the postmodernists started designing buildings that had ornamentation on it or had a site-specific design. The design would relate to the surroundings where it's going to stand. We call that contextual. And a good example of a contextual postmodern design is the gray building on the left. That's 2 nifty shades of gray, girls, not 50 shades of gray. But anyway, about a third of the way up and up at the top corners, those pulled out cornices, if you look at the little bridge house over here on the left, doesn't it kind of look like that? Kind of reminiscent a little bit. And the first cornice lines up with the neighboring building, so it's tying its design into the surroundings. 35 West Wacker was designed by an Irish-born architect, Kevin Roche, working with John Dinkeloo. I think he's based in Connecticut now. But this is home to Leo Burnett Advertising Agency, big company that brought us the Marlboro Man and Tony the Tiger, Snap, Crackle, Pop, bunch of those famous ad campaigns that we're all familiar with. 55 West Wacker, the tan building next on the left, is a rugged style we call brutalism. Now, it has a raked concrete pebble aggregate exterior that gives that design really a muscular quality, I'd say. In fact, it allows it to hold its own between the 2 big boys on either side of it. It was built 20 years earlier, 1968, a design by Otto Stark of C.F. Murphy, and it reminds some of you of the Yale University Art and Architecture building in New Haven. Now, if you look way up at the top of the next glassy tower, on all 4 elevations is that triangular element called a pediment. Notice it repeats at the street level over the entryways. This is my Parthenon on steroids. This is exaggerated postmodern classical architecture, designed by a Spanish architect too, Ricardo Bofill, working with DeStefano Partners Chicago. You look at the face of that building, you can hardly tell where one floor begins and another ends because of the design of the exterior, and the plasters look like they're almost wallpapered on the exterior. What languished undeveloped and unfinished for quite a number of years now is getting back underway, and it's going up as a rental tower, luxury rentals. But I'm going to skip ahead to the next building on the left that takes us back to the Art Deco period of the 20s. This went up about 1929-30, the LaSalle Wacker building. So it's Art Deco in its design. Notice the fluting and zigzags at the base of the building, but also take note of the shape of that building. It looks like a high-backed armchair configuration, which illustrates the response of a number of Chicago architects to an ordinance they passed in 1923 that required all buildings over a certain height, they had to have setbacks in them. They couldn't just go up in one big block and create like a canyon along the streets. And also it gets light and air to the interior offices. New York City had a similar setback ordinance earlier than Chicago, and early skyscrapers there tended to look like tiered wedding cakes with their setbacks. Ours look like pieces of furniture in Chicago. I'll show you some more pieces of furniture. That was also Halliburton Root, working with Rabori, Dewey, Wentworth, McCormick. And the big building coming into view on the left now, you can see was built in 2 phases. The larger left-hand portion dates back to 1927. GAPW, who did the Wrigley, remember, designed the left side, and it has an Art Deco shaft, but neoclassical detailing at the base, those Ionic pilasters and a colonnade up at the top. 60 years later, Adrian Smith of Skidmore, Owings Merrill, a leading architecture firm, designed the very contextual postmodern addition to the original builder's building. It's kind of like looking at grandpa and grandson here. You can see the family resemblance, but they're years apart, 60 years apart. But he unified the whole building by putting that, hide your eyes up there with the brochure, put a 4-story glass mansard roof on the top. That put 4 more floors of office space up in the high rent district. The owners love that, more money. Adrian Smith, by the way, left SOM after having been one of their leading postmodern architects for 40 years, about 7 years ago, and he started a new firm at the age of 62 with Gordon Gill. And I'll talk more about Adrian Smith later. Another postmodern design over on the left, 225 West Wacker, has a round grille over the entryway and dark green marble cladding at street level. We'll see that again at the next building on the left. They had some leftover stuff, I think, and used it on this 1989 building. But this building, very contextual. Look up at the top, it has bridge tower-like elements on the corners, because here it is on the river, and a bridge between them even. Notice that up at the top? And then as you come down from the bridge, there's a prairie-style urn, a la Frank Lloyd Wright, the famous architect. They're paying homage to Wright because right behind that building is the Green Line elevated track that goes out to Oak Park, where Frank Lloyd Wright Home and Studio, Unity Temple, a lot of his work is located. As I said, this was 1989, a design by Kohn Pedersen Fox. That's K-O-H-N, Kohn Pedersen Fox from New York. And they were a very young firm when they got their first commission in Chicago, which is coming up on the left, the Green Building. And the Green Building, 333 West Wacker, is always voted one of Chicago's favorites. It's almost like a piece of sculpture here on the river. Quite a stunning and contextual design also. We're at the end of the main branch now, and where the north and south branches converge, and there's a curve here in the river, and look at the sweeping curve on the face of the riverside face of this building anyway. And of course it's the color of the river. You know, our Chicago River is always shades of green because of the algae that grows underneath. But you got to come back on St. Patty's Day because they put dye in the river, and it is emerald green then. It is fabulous. We do that when the leprechauns come to Chicago for St. Patty's Day. Now, at the base of that building, there are horizontal bands of marble and granite that hide the mechanicals for that skyscraper. Often, or usually even, the mechanicals will be on the roof of a building, but in this case, because the elevated trains make a lot of noise when they rattle by, and the track is right beside that building, it went up in the mid-'80s before they had good soundproofing glass. So they started the offices above that train track level. And those round grills at the base are air intake valves for the mechanicals. If you walk around the back of that building, though, you'll see it continues its contextual design because the backside follows the grid pattern of the loop streets with some interesting notches and a very dramatic entryway on the loop side. Stunning building, Kohn Pedersen Fox. We're going to head up the north branch of the river just a little ways. Historically, the north branch of the river was industrial, kind of the working branch, warehouses and stuff, but more recently it's become a very fashionable place to live. And I'll talk about the building that's right here on the river, River Bend Residences, built on a very narrow lot because the river's on this side, and right behind that building are Metra train tracks. So it has what's called a single loaded corridor. It's only 1 unit deep all the way across. There are townhouses at the base of the building, parking garage. They still take the cars up on 2 elevators in this building because it's not wide enough to have turnaround ramps, and then condos above. But every unit owner in River Bend has this fabulous view looking up the main branch. However, they're already raising Cain because 3 skyscrapers are planned on this little spit of land right across from them. But this was by DeStefano Partners, and it went up in 2002. And right next door to it is a kind of a pinkish building old building. Around 1900, Frank Abbott had designed it as the North American Cold Storage Warehouse. It's a skeletal frame building, but look into the balconies and see how thick the walls are. They're thick walls for insulation because it was like a big brick refrigerator. And in 1981, a local architect, Harry Weiss, decided to give that old baby a new use. We call that adaptive reuse. And I was told it took them 6 months to thaw the building out. And then when they put in additional windows and the balconies, they had to remove about 500 truckloads of insulation that they discovered was matted horsehair and cork. In fact, they removed enough cork from that building to have kept Sammy Sosa in bats forever. Some of you will get what I mean on that. It's called Fulton House today. And Harry Weiss, who did the redo on Fulton House, also was the designer of these futuristic multi-level townhouses coming into view on the left. Notice the sail-shaped side of the building and the porthole windows. There's like a crow's nest staircases there. Whole nautical theme going here. We see a pelican on the balcony there. His beak can hold more than his belly can. But Harry Weiss, these went up in 1988, and I think the original owners still live here. Harry Weiss, a beloved Chicago architect, originally from Evanston, Illinois. He died in 1998, but he was a friend of the river, loved the river, and a preservationist, and I think a man ahead of his time. And I call him Mr. Triangle. Look at all the triangular shapes in that building. More about Harry Weiss later.